Well, I think the extra 25% may never materialize. We have a summit meeting of Trump and President Putin coming up shortly. Maybe it's possible there will be some advance on the Ukraine war issue. If so, I think Trump would say that he's suspending the 25% extra tariff. So I think that some of the worst possibly will be renegotiated. But what I've said all along in India is don't count on the U.S. market as being your key or on a U.S. alliance as being your security. This is a mistake. The U.S. is never going to be widely open to India's exports. Maybe it won't be as punitive as right now, but it will not be open. India's export future, as is true of China and many other places, will be more in the emerging and developing economies, actually, than in the two Western rich regions, North America and Western Europe, because both of those regions are slow growing and protectionist. And they are going to become more protectionist over time, not less protectionist. So there's a short-term question. India, yes, should try to negotiate better. I'm not at all against that. But I think that the strategic hopes of India, that it's the U.S.-India partnership that will replace China in America's supply chains, and also that will be the core of India's security arrangements, that I don't believe at all. Do what we say, not what we do. And that's a cornerstone of American arrogance, which is that we don't have to abide by international norms and standards. Of course, to my mind, it's wholly destructive, but it's important that the Indian government have a realistic perception of this. When I said these things in March and April, many people were more skeptical or optimistic, saying, no, we're going to get a great deal. Don't worry, we have the inside track, and so on. I didn't believe it then. I don't believe it now. And I certainly would not rely on it for the future. Last night, I went out to dinner. I used my credit card. I paid the restaurant. I ran a trade deficit with the restaurant. They didn't rip me off. I didn't sell any goods or services to the restaurant, by the way. It was an out-and-out bilateral trade deficit. This is basic economics. Now, sometimes you run an overall trade deficit if you add up your deficits and surpluses, because maybe you're borrowing in order to finance a house, or you're borrowing to finance an automotive purchase, or you know that your income is about to rise in the next 2 or 3 years, so you want to raise your living standards right now. Or you're profligate, like the United States is, which says, we'll let our kids pay the debt, not us. And all of those are reasons why you could have an overall trade deficit that has nothing whatsoever to do with the trade policies of your trading counterparts. This is basic economics. The overall balance, which we call the current account balance, which takes into account not only goods, but also services and income flows from net investments and unilateral transfers in both directions. The current account deficit is a measure of a country's spending in excess of its production or its income. So basically, if you spend more than you make, you run a deficit. That is not a reflection of perfidious behavior of those that are running surpluses. It's a measure of the fact that they tend to have a higher saving rate than you do, you have a low saving rate, and therefore you're spending more than your income. Now, the United States does not want to think in these terms. Donald Trump is an economic illiterate. His advisors are, by the way, almost all are lawyers, not even economists, and the couple economists around are pretty bad ones. They are micro, not macro economists. But ask a macroeconomist what an overall imbalance means, and they'll tell you you're investing more than you're saving, or you're spending more than your income, whatever it is. If you want to get that under control, adjust your own spending behavior. The big challenge has come from the fact of the one big beautiful bill, so-called, that was passed last month. That is the budget measure, which put the United States on a course of persistent high deficits for the next decade. So we set in place a very low saving, high deficit trajectory. That's in a context in which the financing of that deficit will become more difficult over time because India, China, other countries do not want to hold so many dollars in their foreign exchange reserves. So they're not just buying up all these treasury bills anymore. And as a result of this, interest rates are high. Our long-term interest rates have reached about 5% rate of return or yield. This is very high. And the result of all of this is that the budget is less stable. The fiscal future is less secure. The dollar will depreciate. All of that means that living standards in the United States will suffer on this basis. And Trump has no answer for any of this. Now add on the tariffs and the disruption and the noise from all of this. I don't see Trump having any kind of victory in reshaping the U.S. economy or reestablishing manufacturing jobs or anything else. I have never predicted a successful administration. When the midterms come, what's happening right now is the Republicans are trying to gerrymander the seats so that they keep their tiny majority. If there's a fair vote next year, the Democrats will regain control of the House, maybe even the Senate. But of course, the Republicans are trying to redraw all the districts right now to somehow keep that sliver of control. So the politics are dirty and they're nasty. But Trump is not going to thrive on the basis of his economic policy. I would have recommended all of these things even without Trump. I'm a believer in the BRICS. I'm a believer in the BRICS remaking the world order for multipolarity and multilateralism. I'm a big believer, by the way, I think it's less controversial now than maybe a couple months ago because of what's happened. But I am a believer in China-India reconciliation and cooperation. I'd like to see the issues that have divided the two giants to be resolved, because I think the gains from close cooperation in making a fairer world would be enormous. You know, it's almost 40% of the world population between the two countries. I'd like to see China support India for a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. I think this would be very important for the world and something that China should do. I'd like to see India and China solve the border issues, which, after all, were made by the British, not by India or China. So it's time for them to be resolved as well. So I see the BRICS as a very constructive force. I do think the BRICS should also intensify work on local currency payments, non-dollar payments for settlements, on establishing strong BRICS financial institutions, and on other forms of cooperation. But this flurry of activity in the last couple of days, well, we can thank Donald Trump. He's the great unifier of the BRICS. I never liked the Quad. I always thought that India's participation in the Quad was not a good idea. I don't think India should align itself with the United States against China, period. I think India should stand by itself. It's our world's most populous country. It's a great power. Uh, of course, it needs and should seek decent relations with the US, but also with China. And I viewed the Quad as a rather crude US attempt to bring India in a subordinate way into the US war on China. I don't think India should be in such a position. I don't think it's good for India. I don't think India really wants to be a subordinate actor for US hegemony. And I said it's not in India's interest to play America's anti China card. So, to my mind, the Quad was a bad idea from beginning to end for India. Well, first of all, I think what Trump did vis-a-vis India is just incredibly stupid. Sorry, from America's point of view. It's a kind of complete disconnect on every other issue. I was never in favor of the Quad, for example, or never in favor of the U.S. India security arrangements as the U.S. saw them. But Trump succeeded in demonstrating to India it's completely unsupportable and unsustainable and untrustworthy in that regard. So Trump did in the U.S. position quickly. I thank him for it. As I said, he's a great unifier of the BRICS, and I'm a believer in the BRICS. But now moving to why he backed down on China, that's easy. Rare earths. And China stood up to the U.S. China's more powerful vis-a-vis the U.S. than India is, no doubt about it. China has a bigger clout, a bigger economy, and it has a very strategic position, of course, in a number of sectors of the economy that the U.S. needs, the most important of which apparently are these strategic mineral sectors and the magnets, the rare earth magnets, and so forth. I'm no expert on the technology, but I think we all learned that the U.S. auto industry almost came to a standstill in a few weeks based on based on China's slowdown or stoppage of exports of certain products to the U.S. Well, the U.S. Authorities figured this out quite quickly, so they backed down quite quickly. I would say that for India, it doesn't have the same clout as China does, but it has clout, and the BRICS have a lot of clout, and the United States needs to be told pretty clearly, you can't do this. This is ridiculous to be going day to day, punishing this one, punishing that one, like lightning bolts from Zeus, as we would say. No, this is not the way the world can actually work. And I think hearing this clearly could get the U.S. to regain some sense. President Lula put it very clearly and explicitly and colorfully a couple of weeks ago when he said, we do not need an emperor. And I think this is the right sentiment. And I think the BRICS as a whole not only should strengthen its economic and strategic relations in view of a multipolar world, but can also say politely but clearly, we don't need an emperor. The United States doesn't run the show, nor does it determine the international trade system. Trump does not have a strategic view, a long-term view, a knowledge, a history, a patience. And this is why American foreign policy is completely unstable right now. And I'm sure with Pakistan, it'll flip flop in multiple directions as well. But there is no strategy right now. This, I think, is important to understand. You can't rely on the United States for a strategic relationship because there isn't one. One shouldn't completely overinterpret anything also because we are seeing improvisation at work by people who don't know very much. We are seeing the Trump phenomenon in part as a kind of tantrum uh, at the end of the American dominance of the international order. What has happened in the last 25 years is that the so-called Western dominant world, which came into being several centuries ago and has lasted through the 20th century, is over. We are in a multipolar world. China is a great power. India is a great power. Russia is a great power. The United States is not the sole superpower. It is not even the predominant power in a multipolar world. And the U.S. has not psychologically or more practically in policy terms adjusted to this new reality or not adjusted well. Trump is flailing around trying to figure out how to assert American authority, assert American dominance, still making demands of countries like India or China or Brazil or Russia that the U.S. Can't impose and enforce. We need true multilateralism that is a rule of law that is backed by the major powers of our day. This means India's seat on the UN Security Council. It means that the United States accepts its position of one among several countries. It means the United States stops provoking and antagonizing other major powers because the basic rule of great powers is stay out of each other's lanes so that we don't have a direct confrontation, especially in the nuclear age. The United States should not be in Ukraine. The United States should not be involved in Taiwan. The United States should not be provoking. And similarly with the other major powers, there should be a good modus vivendi among the major powers. The UN is the right body for this, but we need a UN 2.0. We should revise the charter. We should reduce the weight of the veto in the Security Council so that one country can't go against the will of the entire world. We should have India in the UN Security Council as a permanent member. We should have, I believe, major campuses of the UN in India, in China, in Africa, and so forth, because this also would make the UN truly the global institution. It started as an American-led institution, if I may say so, but it should be truly a globally owned, operated, and loved institution, and that should mean multiple campuses of the UN around the world.